You're not buying land, son. You're buying history, and history doesn't stay buried forever. The wind hit hard against the porch, slamming the screen door over and over like it was trying to warn him. Jack Callahan stood in the middle of the field just as the storm was gathering. The sky above Silverado Ridge was bruised purple, stretching wide over a land that seemed too quiet for its own good. He squinted against the cold air, one hand gripping the wooden post where the soil had caved in hours earlier. He wasn't supposed to be here at dawn, knee-deep in mud and trouble. He'd only come out to fix the fence. Instead, he'd found something solid buried beneath the surface, a corner of weather-worn wood, too perfectly shaped to be rock. Now it stared back at him like an unblinking eye. Jack crouched, fingers brushing the cold surface. Lightning cracked somewhere beyond the ridge. For a brief second, the whole field flared white, revealing the silhouette of the old barn, the barbed wire fence, and a figure standing at the far tree line. Still, watching. Hell, he whispered instinctively, reaching for the revolver at his hip. The figure didn't move, and just as suddenly as the flash came, darkness returned. The shape was gone. Maybe it had never been there at all. The ranch was supposed to be abandoned, supposed to be his. But nothing about this land felt like it belonged to anyone. 12 hours earlier, Jack had been sitting on that same porch alone with nothing but a cup of black coffee and the sound of cicadas for company. He'd left the army 3 months ago with more ghosts than friends, and Silverado Ridge, this cracked, half-forgotten stretch of New Mexico, was supposed to be a fresh start. Cheap land. No questions. Peace and silence. Then Tom Yarrow showed up. Jack had noticed him long before he knocked a stooped man walking up the dirt path like the world was chasing his shadow. His boots dragged, his eyes darted. He clutched a leather satchel tight against his chest. By the time he reached the steps, his breathing was shallow, like he'd outrun something big. "You Jack Callahan," Tom rasped. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the satchel. "That's what it says in my mail." Jack leaned back in his chair, wary but calm. "What's this about?" Tom pulled out a crumpled deed and a small silver dollar. "I'm selling you a ranch. 3,000 acres. $1. Jack laughed, the sound short and dry. "You're out of your damn mind." Tom stepped closer, and something in his eyes stopped Jack cold. It wasn't madness, it was fear. Old, bone-deep fear. "This land," Tom whispered, voice trembling, "it doesn't belong to me. Never did. But it's on my name, and it's gotta leave my name." "Do you want it or not?" Jack glanced at the paper. Silverado Ridge Ranch. 3012 acres. One owner, Thomas Yarrow. He'd done land deals before during his years in the service. Nothing about this looked fake, which somehow made it worse. "What's the catch?" Tom flinched, like the question burned him. "No questions. Just don't dig too deep into the past. Some things should stay buried." Jack tilted his head. "That's supposed to scare me, it should." Tom shoved the deed into his hands. $1. Take it." For a moment, Jack thought about laughing in the man's face, but something in Tom's eyes, raw, desperate, kept him silent. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a coin, and slapped it into Tom's palm. Tom didn't even look at it. He pressed the silver dollar into Jack's hand like sealing a deal with something older than both of them. "Good luck," Tom said. Then he turned and walked back down the road, never looking over his shoulder. By sunset, he was gone. The first thing Jack noticed after taking the deed was how damn quiet the land was. Not peaceful quiet, unnatural quiet. The wind cut through the mesquite trees like a warning. The barn groaned in the breeze. A weather vane screeched with every turn. He tried to shake it off. This wasn't Afghanistan. It wasn't a combat zone. It was just dirt fence posts and an old house that needed too many repairs. Then the fence on the north pasture collapsed. That's what led him to the wooden corner sticking out of the earth. He'd grabbed a shovel, thinking it was an old crate or some rancher's forgotten trash. But the deeper he dug, the heavier the air felt, like the land itself didn't want him there. By the time the sun cracked the horizon, Jack had uncovered enough to see it wasn't just a crate. It was a box. A coffin-sized box. And someone was watching from the trees. The memory of Tom's voice scraped at the back of Jack's mind. Don't dig too deep. He should have stopped. A normal man might have. But Jack Callahan didn't leave ghosts alone anymore. He dropped the shovel, straightened up, and scanned the tree line with narrowed eyes. The figure was gone, but the feeling wasn't. His pulse thudded against his throat. The storm gathered fast over the ridge, swallowing the sun. Fine, Jack muttered. Let's see what the hell you're hiding. He returned to the porch, grabbed his flashlight and his revolver. Mud clung to his boots as he knelt beside the box again. Rain started to patter against the dry earth, soft at first, then steady. He dug. With every shovelful, the air seemed to thicken. The box emerged fully, a rotted wooden chest, older than the house, with markings carved deep into its surface. They weren't English. They weren't Spanish either. Jagged symbols spiraled across the lid like someone had tried to lock away something that should never be opened. Jack pressed his hand against the wood. It was as cold as riverstone, too cold for something buried under dirt. A fresh chill ran down his spine. Lightning split the sky again. For half a heartbeat, he saw the figure in the distance, closer this time. "All right, asshole," Jack hissed. He lifted his revolver. But the figure faded back into the tree line, swallowed by the storm. The wind howled through Silverado Ridge, a sound that seemed less like weather and more like a warning. Jack straightened up, scanning the ridge, the old house, the barn, the darkness that wrapped around everything. This was supposed to be his clean start. $1. One chance. A quiet life far from everything he'd seen overseas, but whatever lay under this ground had a heartbeat of its own. He wiped the mud off his hands, not noticing the faint black residue it left on his palms. His breath came out in fog. New Mexico doesn't get this cold in April, he thought. Thunder rolled low and long. He backed away from the box, returned to the porch, and leaned against the railing. The deed sat on the table beside his half-empty coffee cup. The silver dollar glinted dully under the stormlight. For a split second, Jack swore the air itself whispered, "You're not alone." At 3 a.m., a sound woke him. A hollow, echoing thump. Jack grabbed his gun, heart hammering. The noise came from the north pasture. One more thump, then another. When he opened the door, the storm had passed, but the air still felt wrong. The lid of the box was ajar. No footprints. No wind strong enough to move a thing like that. Just the lid shifted. He aimed the flashlight. Mud clung to the edge where something had pried it open. Jack approached slowly, every nerve screaming. But when he reached the box, the lid was closed, sealed tight like it had never moved. His hands were shaking now, but he wasn't the kind to back off. He whispered to the darkness, almost laughing at his own nerves. "Jesus, Callahan, you're talking to a box." Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was waiting. By dawn, the rain had dried. Jack stood at the field again, shovel in one hand, revolver in the other, staring at the box. He hadn't opened it. Not yet. Tom Yarrow's words echoed in his head like a curse. He could walk away, sell the land, burn the deed, start over again somewhere else. But Jack Callahan wasn't wired that way. He'd lived through worse than old wood and a few ghosts. He stepped forward, boots sinking in soft mud. One breath, then another. The box waited. So did whatever history it carried. In the distance, a hawk cried out. The wind picked up again, whispering through the cracked fence and the dry brush like a voice too old to belong to the living. Jack tightened his grip on the shovel. "All right," he said, steady and low. "Let's finish this." His shovel hit the latch with a sharp crack. Jack standing over the mysterious box at Silverado Ridge, the storm still echoing in the distance. Whatever he finds inside will drag him into a 200-year-old conspiracy he never asked to inherit. The box contains bones and a letter from the past, a letter that will bring Emily Mercer into the story and uncover the first layer of the secret buried beneath Silverado Ridge. The smell hit him first. Rot old leather and something sour that clung to the back of his throat like smoke. Jack pried open the chest with the flat end of his shovel, bracing for something, anything, but still wasn't ready when the lid gave way with a long, aching groan. Inside was darkness. The bone. He flinched. A human skull stared up at him from the shadows of the chest, partially buried beneath strips of cloth long turned to black pulp. The jaw hung open, empty eye sockets filled with mud and time. Jack recoiled, stumbling back into the wet earth. His heart slammed against his ribs. Someone buried this, intentionally. He stepped closer again, flashlight trembling in his hand. The skeletal remains were curled tight, like someone had forced the body to fit. But it wasn't just the bones. There were things placed alongside its symbols. He guessed wooden tokens, a rusted pocket watch, and something glinting beneath the ribs. He reached in careful and pulled out a sealed envelope, astonishingly well-preserved wax still intact. The parchment was yellowed but dry. The writing on the front was delicate, loopy, almost elegant. It read, "To Miss Eliza Mercer, do not open unless all else is lost." Jack stared at the name. He'd seen Mercer before. The general store. Emily Mercer. He looked back at the bones. Clutched in one hand, frozen in death, was a faded cloth scrap. A family crest, a militia flag. He didn't recognize it. But it was clear someone had died protecting this letter. He whispered to no one. If these bones could talk, they'd scream. The air around him was still, too still. Jack resealed the box with care, covering it with a tarp from the shed. He didn't sleep that night, just sat at the table with the letter under his hand, wondering if he was being pulled into something far bigger than he could handle. But the next morning, he knew what he had to do. The general store in Silverado Ridge looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years. Weather-worn siding, a swinging sign, and a single bell over the door that jingled faintly when Jack stepped inside. Emily Mercer was behind the counter, checking inventory and scribbling notes. She looked up, surprised, a smile forming, and then fading when she saw his face. "You okay?" she asked. Jack nodded slowly. "We need to talk." She blinked, eyes narrowing. "About what?" He pulled the envelope from his jacket and slid it onto the counter. Her hands trembled before they even touched it. "Eliza Mercer," she breathed. "Where did you get this buried?" "On the north pasture. In a box with a body." Emily's face went pale. She reached out and traced the writing with her fingertips like she was touching a ghost. I thought this was just a story," she said. "A family myth. My grandfather said Eliza wrote something before she disappeared. Said she tried to warn people, but they called her mad." "She wasn't," Jack said. "She was murdered." or close to it. Someone buried her words with a corpse. Emily broke the seal with shaking hands. The letter unfolded like it had been waiting to be read. Jack watched her eyes scan the text, first confused, then horrified. "It names names," she whispered. "She says my great-great-grandfather, James Mercer, was hanged for theft he didn't commit, that he didn't steal the gold, that he was paid, hired, then framed." By who, she swallowed hard. Judges, sheriffs, land officials, people with power. She said they took the land, stole the mine, and killed anyone who could expose them. Jack leaned in. "Are any of those names still around?" Emily didn't answer. She walked to the shelf behind the counter and pulled out a framed photo of an old black-and-white town meeting from the 1800s. Then another newer in color. Side by side, same families, same surnames, same legacy. Wickham, Harrison, Coleman. Jack stared at the name. Sheriff Boyd Coleman. Emily nodded. "They've been running this town for generations. Lawmen, bankers, mayors. And Mercer, our name's been the opposite. Shamed. Disgraced. He died with a rope around his neck, Jack. And the story stuck." Jack's jaw tightened. "You still think this is just history?" he asked. Emily hesitated. "What do you mean I think someone wanted me to find this? Or maybe expected me to? The guy who sold me the land, Tom Yarrow, practically shoved the deed at me and ran." Emily's eyes widened. "Wait. Yarrow. Yeah." She moved behind the counter, rummaging through a drawer until she found an old ledger. She flipped it open, fingers scanning the entries. "Tom Yarrow worked for the Land Commission," she said, "until he quit a few years ago. Said he'd seen things he couldn't unsee. He was in charge of historical land surveys, so he knew exactly what was buried under that field," Jack said, "and wanted you to find it." The bell above the door jingled, both of them frozen. Sheriff Coleman stepped inside. He was tall, broad, with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. His badge caught the sunlight just right. "Morning, folks," he said. "Emily." "Jack. Heard you were doing some digging out on that old ranch." Jack forced a neutral tone. "Just clearing out the fence line. Rocks. Junk." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Uh-huh. Funny thing, that land. Always seems to get people hurt. The previous owner, Tom Yarrow, wasn't it? Disappeared last I heard." Emily didn't say a word. Her face was stone. Coleman's smile twitched. "Be careful, Jack. Silverado Ridge doesn't take kindly to grave diggers." Then he tipped his hat, turned, and walked out. The bell echoed like a gunshot. Jack exhaled slowly. "He knows." Emily swallowed. "Then we don't have time." Jack looked down at the letter again. "There's more," she said, her voice low. "The letter mentions a tree split by lightning. Says there's evidence buried under it that could clear my family's name." Jack nodded. "It's on the eastern ridge. I saw it yesterday." Emily met his eyes. "Then we dig." They left the store through the back, hearts pounding. Jack could feel the weight of the letter inside his jacket like it was made of iron. Behind them, a black SUV slowed near the store and rolled on without stopping. Somebody was watching. The next move wouldn't be safe. But it was necessary. And something told Jack this was only the first grave he'd be unearthing. They head to the eastern ridge, and what they find beneath the lightning-split tree will confirm that murder wasn't just history. It was the foundation. The tree stood like a scar against the sky, twisted half dead, and split clean down the center, just like the letter said. They reached it just before sunset, after winding through narrow trails in Emily's old pickup. Dust clung to the windows, the tires chewed through loose dirt. Jack killed the engine and let the silence settle. The place was quiet in a way that made your skin itch. No birds, no wind, just the steady pulse of the heat dying with the day. Emily stepped out first, her boots crunching on dry grass. She looked up at the lightning-split oak towering over them like it had been waiting. A tree doesn't split like that unless heaven itself wants something revealed, she said. Jack grabbed the shovels from the bed of the truck. Then let's see what heaven buried. They worked fast, adrenaline doing more than muscle. Emily dug like the truth was buried in her blood, and maybe it was. Jack matched her rhythm, the red clay giving way under years' of pressure. Every strike of the shovel rang louder than it should have. Every clump of earth unearthed something older, something heavier. 30 minutes in, Jack hit something solid. He froze. "Emily," he said, brushing away dirt with his hands. "We've got it." It was a metal box, old rust-eaten at the corners, sealed tight but intact. Smaller than the coffin-sized chest they'd found before. This one had been hidden with intention, wrapped in oilcloth beneath a thin layer of stone. Jack pried it open. Inside were documents, dozens of them, some folded in neat stacks, others bundled with twine. The paper was yellowed but protected. Handwriting scrawled across the top pages, contracts, letters, confessions, and beneath it all, a thick, leather-bound ledger with a brass clasp. Emily flipped through it fast, her breath catching as she read. "These are land deeds," she whispered. "Mining claims, testimonies. It's all here. Names, dates, even payments." Jack leaned over her shoulder. "Look at the signatures. They were familiar. Judge Harrison, Marshal Wickham, Land Commissioner Bradford. And then one more. Coleman," Jack said. "That's the sheriff's middle name. I've seen it on his badge. Thomas Bradford Coleman." Emily's eyes went wide. So it's not just the descendants of the old conspirators still around. It's the same family, still in power, still covering it all up. Jack thumbed through another bundle. This is a goddamn manual for generational corruption. They didn't just kill for gold. They turned it into a legacy, into law. Emily pulled out a single envelope unopened. It had Eliza Mercer's name against her ancestor. Inside, a final note. A map. A rough sketch of the ridge with a mark near Devil's Creek. "Behind the waterfall lies the rest," Emily read aloud. "The gold they couldn't claim publicly. The names they couldn't burn. What they feared most is buried there." Jack stared at the drawing. That's a full mile through rough terrain. No road, no cover. And no time, Emily said. "We can't sit on this, not with Coleman sniffing around." Jack stood checking the ridgeline. The sun had dipped past the hills, painting the land in a dull, blood-orange glow. "Then we go tonight." Emily hesitated. "Jack, if we do this, there's no going back. They'll come for us. They already are." As they gathered the documents, Jack noticed something odd in the box's bottom lining, a thin strip of copper folded over the edge. He pried it loose. A hollow sound. A false bottom. He lifted it. Beneath was a second, smaller ledger. The pages were newer, crisper, the ink fresher. Emily read the first entry aloud. June 12th, transfer approved. Parcel 406 acquired. Target J. Callahan. Method indirect. Deed handoff scheduled via Yarrow. Her voice broke. Jack took the book from her hands, scanning the page. Every word landed like a punch. Objective. Allow subject to uncover legacy materials. Neutralize post-retrieval. Emily stepped back. They planned this. Jack, you weren't lucky. You were chosen. He felt cold in his bones. They wanted me to find this, he said, so they could make me disappear right after. He looked up at the ridge. The wind had shifted. The world had changed. We're not just unearthing a crime, Jack muttered. We're standing in the middle of its next chapter. Emily clutched the bundle of documents tight. Then we finish what Eliza started. Jack gave her a grim look, resolved. We ride tonight. They wrapped the documents in canvas and stuffed them into Jack's saddlebag. Emily changed into darker clothes and tied her hair back. Jack loaded his revolver and tucked the smaller ledger into his jacket. As they mounted the horses, headlights flared in the distance, brief scanning, then gone. A black SUV, probably more. Jack hissed through his teeth. We've got tails. Then we stay off the road, Emily said. They veered down into the dry wash that cut around the base of the ridge. The terrain was brutal, rocky, uneven, and filled with brush, but it gave them cover. The farther they went, the quieter it got. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own blood moving. Jack kept checking behind them. Shadows moved wrong. The moon flickered behind thin clouds. A coyote's howl rolled through the canyon like a war cry. Emily pulled up suddenly. There she said, Devil's Creek. They could hear it before they saw a steady roar, water crashing into a pool carved by time. Jack dismounted first, pulling the map from his coat. It said behind the falls, a tunnel. He scanned the rock face with his flashlight. Emily followed, eyes wide, breath sharp. Then she saw it. A seam in the stone partly hidden by moss and shadow, just wide enough to slip through. She looked at Jack. You ready? Jack gave her a half smile. I stopped being ready 3 conspiracies ago. They pushed through together. The water roared behind them. The tunnel swallowed them whole. What they'd find beyond that narrow passage would change everything, not just for them, but for Silverado Ridge. For every name in those ledgers. For every buried lie wrapped in a stolen life. They were no longer trespassing. They were witnesses. And witnesses were dangerous. Deep beneath the surface of Devil's Creek, Jack and Emily uncover a chamber that proves the murders never stopped. And someone is still down there waiting. The air inside the tunnel felt like breathing through old paper. Dry. Dead. Thick with silence. Jack ducked low as they moved deeper, the walls narrowing on either side. His flashlight cast a narrow beam down the corridor, catching rough pickaxe marks, rusted nail heads, and bits of shattered wood. The whole place felt carved not by nature, but by desperation. Emily followed behind Boots, scraping softly against the stone floor, her breathing tight. She clutched the wrapped documents to her chest, like a shield, her eyes flicking toward every shadow. You feel that? She whispered. Jack nodded. Yeah. It's not just old air. It's pressure. They reached a bend where the tunnel widened into a natural cavern. The moment Jack's light swept across the chamber, Emily gasped. Canvas sacks lined the stone walls stacked in neat rows. Most were rotting through, but the faded symbols still showed territorial government seals, worn but unmistakable. But it wasn't the gold that made them both freeze. It was the bodies. Dozens of skeletons scattered between the sacks, some curled in corners. Others collapsed in piles like they'd been thrown in and forgotten. Some still had remnants of clothing, boots, torn jackets, mining helmets from the 1800s. A few were more recent military tags, cracked sunglasses, duct-taped boots. Oh my God. Emily breathed, her hand covering her mouth. Jack crouched beside one of the piles, lifting a rusted badge from the dust. Deputy U.S. Marshal. This guy didn't die 200 years ago. He swept the light across the wall. Etchings had been scratched into the stone in frantic, desperate hands. Names, tally marks, a single sentence carved again and again. They knew. Emily knelt beside a skeleton near the back. Beneath its ribcage was a leather satchel protected beneath oilskin. Inside were more documents, some ancient, some disturbingly fresh, and then a sealed envelope marked with today's date. Emily opened it with trembling hands. "To whoever finds this," she read aloud. "If you're reading this, I'm probably already dead. My name is Tom Yarrow. I was forced to sell the ranch. They told me what would happen to the next owner, just like the last one. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to break the chain. I had to make it stop." Jack closed his eyes for a second. Yarrow hadn't just run. He'd sacrificed himself to set this in motion. Emily's voice cracked as she finished the note. "I hope you find the truth. I hope you burn them all." They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the remains of too many stories, too many endings. Then footsteps echoed behind them. Jack spun around, flashlight off, gun raised. Voices, low, careful. A beam of light cut through the tunnel, swaying gently. "We got movement," a man's voice said. "Calm, professional." Another answered. "Coleman wants them alive if possible." Emily's eyes met Jack's. "We're not alone." Jack grabbed her arm, pulling her into a narrow alcove beside the gold sacks. He clicked off the light. In the dark, he could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his skull. A third voice echoed from the entrance. "Search the left wall. The tunnel splits near the back." Jack whispered, "We have maybe 30 seconds before they sweep this chamber." Emily pointed. "There's a narrow pass back there. I saw it earlier. Maybe it loops around." Jack nodded. They slipped along the wall, careful not to knock anything loose. One wrong step and they'd be spotted. Then a voice boomed behind them, closer. "Silverado Ridge doesn't take kindly to grave diggers. Sheriff Coleman." He stepped into the chamber, flanked by 4 armed men. Their lanterns spilled yellow light across the room, casting long, twisted shadows. Coleman looked around like admiring a trophy room. "Impressive, isn't it?" he said to no one in particular. 200 years of secrets. Every man who found this place thought he was the first. They always think they're special. Jack's fingers curled around his revolver, but he didn't move. Coleman stepped toward the center near the sacks. "You know what makes this operation perfect? Nobody believes in ghosts. They all think history's just over." One of his men called out, "You think they're still in here, oh?" Coleman said, turning slowly. "I know they're still in here." His eyes landed inches from where Jack and Emily stood, hidden by a stack of canvas and bones. Jack held his breath. The moment hung sharp and silent. Then Coleman walked past. Emily tugged Jack's sleeve, whispered in his ear, "That tunnel, now." They slipped into the crevice, narrow, sharp-edged, and crawled past rocks, scraping their arms and legs. The voices faded behind them, muffled now, but still close. The passage angled up, rising into a tighter chute. Jack's shoulders barely fit. then finally light. They burst out behind the waterfall into the cold night air, both soaked instantly. Jack spun to look back but saw no pursuit yet. They didn't wait. They ran. Through the woods, ducking branches and stumbling over roots. Jack kept Emily close. Their lungs burned. The sound of hoofbeats cracked behind them closer than before. They reached the pickup and tore out down the dirt road, gravel flying. Back in town, lights were still on at Rosa Delgado's diner. Jack slammed the brakes, pulling into the alley. Emily jumped out, clutching the canvas satchel. Inside, Rosa blinked as they burst through the back door, wild and dripping. What the hell? Jack cut her off. We need to hide these now, somewhere no one but you can find. Emily laid the documents on the table. Rosa looked down at the names. Her face paled. I haven't seen some of these names since I was a child, she whispered. My father warned me never to speak of them. Jack leaned in. You know what this is? Rosa looked up. Her eyes were glassy but steady. It's the whole damn truth. Outside, a black SUV idled by the main road. Sheriff Coleman sat in the driver's seat, staring out at the quiet street. He lit a cigarette with hands that didn't tremble. A man in a suit sat beside him. You sure they were in there? The man asked. Coleman exhaled smoke. Oh, I'm sure. The suited man looked out at the dark. What if they made it out? Coleman crushed the cigarette out on the dash. Then we finish what our grandfathers started. Back inside the diner, Emily looked over the final page in the ledger. There's more, she said. A name we didn't see before. Jack leaned over. It was a letter of transfer. Land deed. Time-stamped just 5 days earlier. Jack's name. His ranch. The line below it read, Target status acquired. Termination scheduled post-confirmation. Emily's hands shook. They planned your death, Jack. Just like everyone else. Jack's eyes went cold. Not anymore. With nowhere safe, Jack and Emily prepare a desperate move to deliver the truth before they're silenced forever. But the town is watching, and someone on the inside may already be helping the enemy. The sun was barely up, but Silverado Ridge already felt like it was holding its breath. Jack sat in the back booth of Rosa's diner, sipping lukewarm coffee that tasted like ash. The documents were hidden in a false floor beneath the walk-in freezer where Rosa promised no one had looked since the Reagan administration. Still, Jack checked the windows every few minutes, like he expected Coleman himself to bust through the door. Emily sat across from him, silent eyes locked on the entrance. Her hair was damp, pulled back in a loose braid. Her knuckles were white from gripping the ceramic mug too hard. Rosa brought over a plate of toast, dropped it on the table, and didn't bother pretending. You look like Death tried to borrow your boots and got scared halfway in. Jack didn't smile. We found the tunnel. Rosa stared at him for a beat. Then she sat down slowly. Behind Devil's Creek, she asked. He nodded. Everything Eliza wrote about was real. The gold, the bodies, the ledger. Emily leaned in. You knew, didn't you? Rosa's face tightened. Not all of it. Not the full rot. But I knew pieces. Enough to keep my head down. You knew people were killed, Jack said. And you stayed quiet. No, Rosa said sharply. I survived. My daddy was the foreman on Wickham's ranch. He found something he wasn't supposed to. Told my mama we had to leave. The next morning he was gone. The sheriff at the time said he ran off. She knew better. And so did I. Jack sat back. So you've been waiting your whole life for this? Rosa shook her head. No, I've been waiting for someone dumb or brave enough to dig it all up. She looked at Emily. Your grandmother used to sit in this booth every Wednesday, wore a green ribbon in her hair. She never said much, but when she looked out that window, it was like she was seeing ghosts. Emily swallowed hard. She probably was. Rosa pointed at the documents. They didn't just build a town, they buried 100 bodies to do it. Jack rubbed his face. Now what? We've got proof, but nowhere safe to go. Coleman owns the sheriff's office. The judge is in that damn ledger. The Wickhams practically own the bank. I know someone who can help, Rosa said. But it'll cost. Jack raised an eyebrow. Who read? Emily blinked. The war vet. He's more than that, Rosa said. He runs message routes between tribal courts and federal offices. Off-grid, no paper trails. You get those documents to him, and he'll make sure they land in the right hands. Where is he? North of the ridge. Lives out by the old horse trails. But he moves around. You'll need to find him fast. Jack nodded. We'll leave tonight. You'll never make it on the road, Rosa said. They're watching every exit. Jack looked out the window, then back at Emily. Then we go where no one's looking. Later that afternoon, they packed the evidence into a weatherproof courier bag and wrapped it in a tarp. Jack secured it under the saddle of his horse, buckling it beneath the blanket. Emily loaded spare rounds into her backpack, along with a small revolver Rosa insisted she take. Have you ever shot? Jack asked. Only tin cans, she said. But I'm a quick learner. Rosa pulled Jack aside before they mounted up. There's something else. She handed him an old key. This opens a storage unit out behind the canyon trail. Belonged to Eliza. Nobody's been there in decades. If you can get there, you might find something worth holding on to. Jack took it without a word. As they rode out, Rosa watched from the edge of her porch. She didn't wave, just nodded once, slow and solemn. They took the old irrigation trails through the valley, staying low. Twilight turned the sky violet as they cut between hills and dry creek beds. Jack led, scanning the horizon. Emily rode close behind her, fingers wrapped tight around the reins. They passed the remains of an old mining post, just scorched timbers and rusted tracks now. Jack slowed. What is it? Emily asked. He pointed at the ridge above them. That trail up there, I saw dust. Someone's tracking us. Emily looked up. A shimmer of motion. Then gone. How many? Doesn't matter. They're better equipped. We move fast or we don't move at all. They reached the storage shed just after dark. It was half buried in the hillside, obscured by brush and thyme. Jack unlocked it and pulled open the door. Inside, dust mildew and a wooden trunk. He cracked it open and found a bundle of oilskin. Inside were old letters, photographs, and a map. Emily knelt beside him, scanning the papers. It's a journal, she whispered. Eliza's. She wrote down everything. Jack flipped through the final pages. Look at this, he said. It lists names, code names, meeting points, payment drops. Emily's eyes widened. It's a network. They had a whole operation. Jack nodded, and someone from inside helped her. A man named Ash, sheriff's deputy. Does that ring any bells? Emily looked at him. Deputy Hank Whitaker. Jack stared at the page. She had help. And maybe we do too. They mounted up again, now racing against time. As they reached the canyon pass, Jack spotted movement. 3 riders, high ridge, closing fast. Ride, he shouted. They galloped hard into the canyon, hooves thundering across stone. Gunshots cracked behind them wild high. Dust exploded near Jack's saddle. Emily ducked low, clinging to her horse. The canyon walls narrowed. Jack veered left. Emily followed. One of the riders clipped a rock and spilled over the edge. Two remained. They reached a choke point where the path narrowed to single file. Jack dismounted and slapped his horse forward. "What are you doing?" Emily yelled, holding them off. "Go!" She shook her head. "No way in hell." "Emily, we do this together." The riders rounded the corner. Jack raised his revolver. "Get ready." Gunfire lit up the canyon mouth. Emily ducked behind a boulder, returning fire with sharp, controlled shots. Jack took out one of the riders with a clean hit to the shoulder. The other fled, horse squealing as it bolted. Silence returned except for their ragged breathing. Jack looked at Emily, stunned. "Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" She smirked, shaking. "Told you. Tin cans." They retrieved the courier bag and mounted up again, heading north under cover of night. Ahead of them was Red. Behind them, Coleman. But they weren't running anymore. They were delivering a reckoning. Red may be their only shot at getting the evidence out, but someone's already waiting for them. And not everyone they meet will be on their side. The stars above the ridge looked sharp enough to cut skin. Jack and Emily rode in silence, the horses moving at a steady trot beneath the moonlight. The air had cooled crisp and clear, but it carried a weight like something just beyond the trees was watching, listening, calculating. They'd been riding for over an hour since the canyon ambush. The courier bag with the ledger and Eliza's journal was strapped tight beneath Jack's saddle. Every now and then he reached back to feel for it, like he needed to know it was still there, still real. Emily broke the silence first. "You think Red's even out here?" Jack nodded once. "If he's not, we're already dead." The land opened wide as they reached the crest. Below, tucked between two jagged hills, was a single fire. Faint, controlled. Not for warmth, not for signaling. A fire built by someone who wanted to be found only by the right people. They dismounted and moved in on foot. As they approached, the figure by the fire didn't flinch. He sat on a rock, sharpening a blade with long, measured strokes. His wide-brim hat cast a shadow over his face, but the flicker of firelight, caught on the edge of an old military insignia, patched onto his jacket sleeve. Jack cleared his throat. "You read," the man didn't look up. "You bring what Rosa said you'd bring." Emily stepped forward. "We've got evidence. Documents, names, everything. We need to get it to the governor's office without going through Coleman Wickham or anyone connected to the ridge." Red looked up now. His eyes were pale and sharp. Weathered but alert. Not the eyes of a man who'd retired. The eyes of someone who'd stepped away and only just. "You got one shot to tell me why I shouldn't burn it all right now," Red said. "Seen a lot of folks come out here thinking they're righteous. Most of them end up buried in someone else's story." Jack met his gaze. "We're not trying to write a story. We're trying to end one." Red stood, took a long breath. "Behind that waterfall lies the reason men kill their friends." Emily's voice caught. "What did you say?" Red stepped closer, his boots crunching in the dirt. "Eliza Mercer wrote to me once, a long time ago, said she'd found something that would shake this place to its core. But she disappeared before she could finish what she started. I was just a kid then, didn't mean much. But Rosa's call, that meant something." He nodded at Jack. "Where's the bag?" Jack brought it forward and opened it. Red knelt beside the fire and started going through the documents. He didn't speak. Didn't blink much either. Just flipped page after page while the firelight danced across names soaked in blood and legacy. After 10 minutes, he exhaled. "This is enough." "You'll take it?" Emily asked. "I'll get it there," he said. "But you need to disappear. Right now, if Coleman even sniffs that this stuff is moving, he'll scorch the whole damn territory to stop it." "We've got 1 or 2 safe places," Jack said. Red shook his head. "Nowhere's safe anymore. Not with what's in this bag." He rewrapped the evidence, tucked it into a weatherproof satchel, and stood. "I leave at first light. If I don't make it, it dies with me." Jack reached into his coat and handed over a USB drive. Copies. Scanned every page. Just in case. Red gave a small grim smile. Smart. Then a sound cut through the woods. A branch snapping. Jack turned first hand, going to his revolver. Emily whispered, "Did they follow us?" Red grabbed the fire with his boot and snuffed it in one clean stomp. Darkness swallowed them. Another noise. Closer this time. Red nodded toward a ridge of boulders. "Move." They scrambled behind cover. Jack crouched low, peering over the top, just in time to see 3 figures emerge from the trees, tactical gear, night vision radios. "These aren't locals," Jack murmured. "They brought in professionals." Red's voice was low and even. "PMC. Coleman must have pulled strings." Emily leaned into Jack. "If they find us, they won't," Red said. "Unless you breathe loud enough for the dead to hear." The mercenaries swept the clearing. One knelt by the fire pit, feeling the warmth. He spoke into his mic. "They were just here. 15 minutes, maybe less." Another pointed toward the slope. "Tracks lead northeast. They're running. Let 'em set a third. We circle wide. Coleman wants them alive." Jack's jaw tightened. "Why keep us alive now?" Red answered for him. "Because you've seen too much, and Coleman wants to know how far it's spread before he cleans the house." Emily gripped Jack's hand. Red waited another 10 seconds before standing. "We move west. Cut through the old cattle trail. Stay low." They moved through the dark for another hour, silent but fast. Red led them through brush and dry creek beds until they reached an abandoned ranger outpost, roof half caved and windows shot out. "This'll do," Red said. "You hole up here." "I finished the run." He turned to leave. Emily called out, "Red." He paused. "If you don't come back," she asked. He looked over his shoulder. "Then you burn the rest of this town down and make them feel every name in that ledger." He disappeared into the trees like smoke. The outpost was dark and cold but dry. Jack and Emily set up in opposite corners, taking turns watching the window. Neither of them slept. In the early hours before dawn, a quiet knock came at the door. Jack raised his gun. A voice whispered, "It's Whitaker." Emily moved first. She opened the door a crack. Deputy Hank Whitaker stood alone, hat off, soaked from dew and sweat. "They know where you are," he said. "And they're coming." Jack pulled him inside, slammed the door. "Why the hell are you here?" "I read the ledger," Hank said. "The one Rosa showed me. The one with my grandfather's name in it." He looked at Emily. "I think Eliza trusted my family once. My grandfather failed her. I won't." Jack didn't lower the gun. "You expect us to believe that," No Hank said. "But I can get you to the second ledger, the one the town never found. The one Eliza hid herself. It's buried under the old church beneath the altar." Emily froze. That church was shut down years ago. Exactly, Hank said. No one's touched it. And if I'm right, the final proof is still in there. Jack lowered the gun. You lead, he said. But know this, if you betray us, I won't, Hank said. I already chose my side. They moved out again as the sky began to shift, burnt orange bleeding into the black. But as they crested the hill, Jack spotted something in the distance. Smoke. Rising from the west, where Red had gone. Emily stepped forward, whispering what they were all thinking. Please don't let that be him. As hope narrows, Jack, Emily, and Deputy Whitaker must risk it all to retrieve the last piece of evidence and confront a betrayal buried beneath Silverado Ridge's only church. The church stood like a wound that never healed. Its white paint had long since peeled to gray. The bell tower leaned slightly to one side, held together more by memory than mortar. Broken windows stared out over Silverado Ridge like tired, blind eyes. A rusted sign swung above the door, St. Agnes Chapel. Jack, Emily, and Deputy Hank Whitaker moved silently through the early dawn light. The sky behind them was still bruised with smoke. No one spoke about it yet, but the rising column to the west said everything. Red's tough, Emily whispered almost to herself. Jack didn't answer. He just kept walking, his hand resting near the grip of his revolver. They reached the steps. Hank went up first. I was baptized here, he said, almost absently. My mom used to sing in the choir, before she knew what kind of men built this town. Jack scanned the empty lot. You sure no one's been inside since it closed? Hank nodded. Doors are locked, windows boarded from the inside. Only people who still come by are ghosts. Jack looked at him. You believe in ghosts, Hank met his eyes. After Devil's Creek. Yeah, I do. They pushed through the warped front door. It groaned like it hadn't been touched in years. Inside, the church smelled of rot and dry wood. Dust coated every pew. The altar stood cracked and empty, the old crucifix above it, broken Jesus hanging sideways like he'd given up too. Emily stepped onto the chancel, her boots echoing. She said it was under the altar. Hank nodded. There's a crawl space. I found the access once when I was 12, trying to hide from a thunderstorm. Jack moved to the edge of the altar, kneeling. He brushed away loose boards until he found a seam. A small, hidden latch. He looked up at the others. Ready, they nodded. Jack pulled. The floor groaned and lifted. Beneath a wooden shaft led down into darkness. Looks like she wasn't just leaving behind Faith, Emily said. Jack flicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the black, revealing a narrow tunnel reinforced with beams. Only one way to find out. He dropped in first. The tunnel was tighter than Devil's Creek, more personal. Hand-dug, claustrophobic. Carvings lined the walls, initials, dates, prayers. At the far end, a stone slab rested beneath layers of tarp and cloth. Jack wiped it clean. Etched into the surface were 4 words, "Let no lie endure." They pried the slab loose. Inside was a sealed lockbox. Jack forced it open. What lay inside made them all go silent. Original land grants, handwritten confessions, maps with kill sites marked in red ink. Personal letters from the founding families, some as recent as 30 years ago, admitting the cover-ups, the payoffs, the murders. And at the very bottom, a tape recorder covered in dust. Emily picked it up. Is this? Hank nodded. Press play. She did. A woman's voice crackled through the speaker. My name is Eliza Mercer. If you're hearing this, I'm dead. And if you found this place, then you're standing in the truth they tried to bury. My husband wasn't a thief. He was a surveyor. He found gold. They killed him to take it. and they came for me next. But I left this. For you. Emily's breath hitched. Her hands shook. They made this town rich, and they made it rotten. But if anyone finds this, don't let it die in the dark. Don't let them win. The tape clicked off. Jack looked at Hank. This is the nail in the coffin. No, Hank said. This is the coffin. He turned toward the tunnel exit. We need to get this to Santa Fe. Today. That's when the sound hit. Boots. Upstairs. Lots of them. Jack killed the light. Emily whispered. How did they followed us, Jack muttered. Or they saw the smoke same as we did. Voices filtered through the floorboards. Spread out. No shots unless necessary. We want them breathing. Coleman. Jack's blood ran cold. He came by himself. Hank drew his sidearm. This tunnel's tight. We can hold them. Jack shook his head. They've got more firepower, better angles. Emily grabbed the recorder and shoved it into her bag. There has to be another way out. Hank hesitated. There might be. Might old priest's tunnel. Emergency exit. Used to connect to the cemetery out back. Never knew if it was real. Jack turned to him. Now's a good time to find out. They moved fast. Jack stayed back just long enough to push the slab back over the box, leaving the truth sealed behind one more lie for now. Then they followed Hank through the narrowest shaft yet. The tunnel bent downward tight enough they had to crawl. Behind them, the voices grew louder, closer. They went underground. Clear the crawl space. The tunnel opened at last into a stone chamber beneath the graveyard. Rusted tools lined the walls, candles, Bibles, a collapsed cot, and at the far side a rusted iron door. Jack slammed his shoulder into it once, twice, until it gave way. They emerged in the cemetery, hidden by high stone walls and cypress trees. Emily looked up at the bell tower now behind them. They're still inside, she whispered. Jack grabbed her hand. Not for long. Gunfire cracked behind them. Bullets chipped the stone as they ran. They raced across the field, through brush, over fences, ducking behind the caretaker's shack. A black SUV skidded into view on the street. Jack grabbed his revolver, but the window rolled down to reveal a familiar face. Rosa. Get in. They dove into the vehicle. Jack slammed the door shut as Coleman's men spilled out of the church, shouting orders. Rosa peeled away tires, shrieking. Jack turned in his seat, catching one last glimpse of St. Agnes, the place where the truth had been buried, and almost died again. But not this time. Back at the diner, they laid out the new documents. Rosa called in Red's network 2 couriers, 1 drone pilot, and a Navajo judge with federal clearance. By sunset, copies were already headed toward Santa Fe, encrypted and documented. But Jack wasn't celebrating. He stood out on the porch, watching the sun go down behind the ridge. Emily joined him. We did it, she said softly. Jack shook his head. Not yet. Coleman's not done. Not until someone ends him. She looked at him. Are you ready for that? He didn't answer at first. Then steady and low. You didn't buy a ranch, Callahan, you were lured into a grave. He turned toward her. Now it's time to bury the right man in it. With the final proof on its way to the governor, Jack and Emily prepare for one last stand. But Sheriff Coleman has a plan of his own, and this time he's not leaving anyone breathing. The knock came just before midnight. 3 soft taps on Rosa's back door. Jack was already up, revolver in hand, eyes sharp from too little sleep. Emily stirred on the couch but didn't move. They both knew what this knock meant. Jack opened the door a crack. Red stood there, blood on his coat, one eye nearly swollen shut, limping. "They tried to torch me outside Dry Gulch," he rasped. "Didn't stick." "You still got coffee?" Jack opened the door wider and helped him in. Emily jumped up and rushed to grab the first aid kit. "You made it," she said. Red sat heavily at the table, breathing hard. "Made it far enough. The docs are delivered. Fed's got eyes now. But it ain't gonna be legal pressure that finishes this." Jack poured him a cup. "Then what will happen?" Huated took a long sip. "You." Jack stared at him. "I'm not the hero here." Red looked him square in the face. "You're not a hero. You're a threat. That's why Coleman's scared. That's why he's throwing everything he has at this." Emily leaned forward. "So what's next?" Red pulled a folded map from his coat pocket, laid it on the table. "Coleman's planning a clean sweep. Tonight. He's hitting the last names on the ledger. The ones who knew, the ones who helped cover it up, and the ones who might talk. He's erasing the past before sunrise." Jack's jaw tightened. "And we're on that list," No Red said. "You're the footnote. The one he wants to crush publicly, to show Silverado Ridge what happens to rebels." Jack paced the room, fists clenched. "So what's the play?" Red pointed to the map. "Wickham Ranch. That's where he's staging. Private Army surveillance gear you only see in overseas conflicts. But his weakness is pride. Coleman doesn't believe anyone will face him head-on. He's betting on silence." Emily stepped closer. "Then we make noise." Jack turned to her. "You sure?" She nodded. "They burned down my grandmother's name. They tried to bury my family with lies. I'm not going to die quietly." Jack looked at Red. "We hit the ranch." Red raised an eyebrow. "You want to walk into the lion's den?" "No," Jack said. "I want to drag the lion out into the open." They spent the next hour prepping. Jack checked his gear, loaded 2 spare clips, reinforced his boots, and wrapped the USB drive copy in duct tape before strapping it to his forearm. If everything else burned, the truth wouldn't. Emily went through the voice recordings, isolating Eliza's last message, boosting the audio, and burning it to a small speaker drive. She slid it into her jacket pocket. "If he won't listen to us, maybe he'll listen to her." Rosa packed a duffel with Smoke's emergency radios and a silver flask. "My father helped build that ranch," she said. "He died trying to stop the rot. If you're going in, you're not going in alone." Red shook his head. "You're not a fighter." "I'm not," Rosa said. "But I know the walls. I know which power lines to cut, and which vents lead to which rooms." Jack gave her a long look. Then he nodded. "We move at first light." The plan was simple. Rosa would enter first, posing as a cleaner, someone loyal to the Wickhams. Her job was to disable external cameras and quietly unlock the back gate. Jack and Red would enter through the rear irrigation ditch, climb through the lower barns, and move toward the control room, where the surveillance and radio feeds were centered. Emily would stay outside monitoring with binoculars, ready to transmit Eliza's message across every speaker the ranch had wired, if they could reach the booth in time. It wasn't foolproof, but it didn't have to be. It just had to hit hard enough that no one could deny what happened next. Just before dawn, they reached the edge of Wickham Ranch. Massive, sterile, a gleaming scar on the land. Concrete bunkers, floodlights, steel fences that hummed faintly with electricity. From a ridge above the south entrance, Emily watched through her scope. 2 guards by the gate, another 3 patrolling the west quarter. Jack adjusted his coat. "Red, you good?" Red loaded a small rifle with silent precision. "As I'll ever be." Jack looked at Emily. "We go quiet." "If we fail, you won't," she said. "But if you do, I'll make sure the whole town hears Eliza's voice before they shut me up." He gave her a sharp nod. Then he and Red disappeared down the slope. Rosa made it first. She walked with a limp, dragging a mop bucket behind her. One of the guards waved her through with a lazy grunt. "You're late," he muttered. "Cleaners don't run," she snapped. Inside, she moved quickly. Past the kitchens, through the mechanical wing, up the utility hall. At the junction, she killed the West Gate camera feed and buzzed open the door. Jack and Red slid through the side entrance and vanished into the shadows. They moved fast, low-cutting between greenhouses and storage buildings. At the northern wing, Red used a knife to pop open the panel beneath the main surveillance room. Jack crawled inside. He emerged beneath the consoles, crept forward, and placed a flash drive into the terminal. A virus, simple but effective. The screens blinked once, then again, and then static. "The system's down," Red said. Jack moved to the PA control booth and clicked the mic. "Emily, you're alive." Emily flipped the switch on her transmitter. Eliza's voice rang out across the compound. "My name is Eliza Mercer. If you're hearing this, I'm already gone." Every speaker, every intercom, her voice cracked through the cold morning like thunder from the grave. "Don't let them bury this. Don't let them bury me." Chaos erupted. Guards shouted. Workers screamed. Coleman's men scrambled to shut down the system, but it was too late. By the time Coleman burst into the control room, Jack was waiting, gun drawn. "Morning, Sheriff." Coleman's eyes flared. "You think this ends here?" "No," Jack said. "But you do." Before Coleman could raise his weapon, Rosa stepped in behind him, taser in hand, and dropped him with a burst of electricity. He hit the floor hard, shaking, mouth foaming. Jack knelt beside him. "Say hello to every name you erased." They dragged Coleman out in cuffs. Red handed him off to 2 tribal marshals waiting at the gate, called in quietly during the transmission. Emily joined them moments later, breathless tears streaking her face. "You did it," she whispered. Jack shook his head. "We all did." But even as dawn rose and federal teams began securing the ranch, Rosa stood still. She pointed across the field, toward a second convoy. Black SUVs. No markings. "No plates," Red muttered. "That's not true." "That's higher." Jack's face darkened. "Then we're not done." As the truth begins to surface, Jack and Emily face the price of exposure and discover that justice in Silverado Ridge was never meant to be clean. The wind shifted as the black SUVs rolled in. Not fast, not loud, just deliberate, like vultures circling a body that hadn't hit the ground yet. The vehicles were spotless windows, dark engines, barely audible. Everything about them screamed authority without a badge. Jack stood beside Red and Emily at the gate of Wickham Ranch, the light from the sunrise casting long shadows behind them. 2 federal agents from Santa Fe had just finished loading Coleman into an armored van when the convoy arrived. Emily whispered, "Those aren't with the governor's office, are they?" Red shook his head. "Nope. That's not true. That's federal, or worse." One of the SUV doors opened. A man stepped out in a tan suit, no-tie aviator sunglasses, clean-shaven, average height. Every inch of him looked forgettable by design. He walked with confidence, but not arrogance. Calm, measured. Jack Callahan, he asked. Jack nodded slowly. Depends who's asking. The man offered a dry smile. Name's Langston. I'm with a Federal Oversight Division. We've been monitoring Silverado Ridge for a while now. You show up now, Jack asked. After decades of corruption, murder, and cover-ups, Langston didn't blink. Timing is everything, Mr. Callahan. You exposed a wound. We're here to determine if the patient lives or gets put down. Red crossed his arms. You mean, are you here to help clean the house or bury it deeper? Langston ignored him. We've reviewed the files your team transmitted. The recordings, the ledger, Eliza Mercer's journal. Impressive work. Impressive enough to bring justice? Emily asked. Langston hesitated. That depends. What you did here will cause a shockwave statewide, maybe further. There are names in that ledger that go beyond this county. Senators, CEOs, generals. He turned toward the ranch. You've stirred a nest that most people don't even know exists. Jack stepped forward. Then burn it. Bring the fire they've been afraid of for 2 centuries. Langston finally looked Jack in the eye. You still don't get it. You weren't supposed to win. What you did wasn't just brave. It was reckless. You turned a local story into a federal crisis. Jack's jaw tightened. People died for this, buried in caves and canyons. You're gonna tell me their lives don't matter because it's inconvenient? Langston glanced at Red, then Emily. No. I'm telling you that their lives matter so much, we have to be smart now. Careful. Surgical. He lowered his voice. If this goes public the wrong way, Silverado Ridge won't be the only place that burns. Jack looked at Emily. Her eyes were wet but steady. He turned back to Langston. Then what's your offer? Langston nodded to his agents. They opened the SUV trunk and pulled out 2 sealed crates. Protection. New IDs. You and Emily disappear. Quietly. Safely. We clean up the rest. Legally. Slowly. Thoroughly. No more blood. Red laughed once, sharp and bitter. You mean they vanish and you bury it like you buried everything else? Langston ignored him. The other option is chaos. Retaliation. You stay, you fight, and maybe they kill you before the courts even see the evidence. Jack stepped toward the crates. And what about Coleman? He'll be prosecuted, Langston said. Federal court. Maximum exposure. We need a symbol. He's perfect. And Wickham? Emily asked. Langston's smile disappeared. We'll deal with him internally. Jack stared at the crates, then at the rising sun. If we run, he said slowly, then they still win. Just a different kind of victory. Langston said nothing. Jack looked at Emily. This isn't just about revenge. It's about making sure no one ever has to do what we did again. Emily stepped forward, shoulder to shoulder with him. We're staying. Langston sighed. That's your choice, but understand this. He took off his sunglasses. You've made enemies now who don't wear uniforms, who don't live in this state, and who've killed people for far less. Jack didn't flinch. Let them come. The next 48 hours were a blur. News trucks began arriving by noon. The story leaked not by the feds, but by Rosa, who'd slipped a copy of the ledger to an old friend at the New Mexico Sun. By sundown, Silverado Ridge was the lead story in every major outlet. Gold, graves, corruption, the small town that hid a 200-year secret. Jack and Emily were offered interviews. They refused. Instead, they stayed in Rosa's basement while federal investigators swarmed the town. Coleman's men were arrested one after another. Wickham gone. fled in the night helicopter out before the press arrived. Red stayed close but always on the perimeter. He knew too much about how shadows moved to sit in the light now. 3 nights after the raid, Jack stood at Eliza Mercer's grave. Emily joined him. "They're calling you heroes now," she said quietly. Jack didn't answer. She rested a hand on his back. "You okay?" He looked at the name etched into the stone. Eliza Mercer, 1876 to 1958. Let no lie endure. Jack spoke, voice low. "Heroes die, Emily. We just lived long enough to tell the truth." She stepped closer. "You think it'll stick?" Jack took a long breath. "We gave them the match. Now it's up to them to light the fire." Back at the ranch, Langston stood in the surveillance room. He stared at a paused frame, Jack's face bloodied but defiant, standing over Coleman. He turned to one of his agents. "Keep your eyes on them, both of them. If they make one wrong move, I want to know." The agent nodded. Langston looked back at the screen. "You don't pull weeds," he said. "You scorch the field." As national attention grows and enemies gather in silence, Jack and Emily must confront what justice truly costs and what kind of war they've just begun. It started with a power outage. The lights flickered across Silverado Ridge just after midnight. Not a storm, no wind, no warning. Just a sudden, unnatural darkness that rolled down Main Street like a wave. Jack jolted awake in Rose's basement, the hum of the old fridge vanishing mid-buzz. Emily was already sitting up, flashlight in hand. "You feel that?" she asked. Jack nodded, reaching for the Glock he kept under the cot. "Something's off." A second later, their phones went dark. No service. No signal. Just a black screen and the dull weight of dread. Jack moved to the window slit near the ground. No lights anywhere. Not even the diner. This wasn't a circuit issue. Someone cut the power. Emily was already pulling on her boots. "You think it's federal?" Jack shook his head. "Langston wouldn't need to sneak around. If this is happening, it's from someone outside the system." That's when the first explosion hit. Not close, but loud enough to shake the glass and rattle their teeth. It came from the West End, where the news vans had parked, where satellite signals were still uploading footage, evidence, interviews. Emily grabbed Jack's arm. "They're wiping the feeds." Another blast. This one closer. More controlled. Like a warning. Rosa came rushing down the stairs, flashlight trembling in her hand. The water tower just lit up. "They're targeting infrastructure." Jack nodded grimly. Classic shock and silence tactic. Red's voice came from behind them, sharp and low. "We're being erased." Everyone spun to see him in the back hallway, coat soaked with rain, shotgun slung across his back. "How'd you get in?" Rosa asked. Red didn't answer. "They're hitting safe houses. Already torched the community center. I saw smoke from the old rail depot, too." Jack stared. "They're not after the evidence. That's already gone." "They're coming for us," Red nodded. "Loose ends." Jack turned to Emily. "Grab the drives. All of them." She was already moving. "Where are we going?" "To make this louder," he said. "They want quiet. We'll give them a goddamn symphony." They took Rose's Jeep, an old Wrangler built like a tank, and loud enough to make a statement. Red rode in back, shotgun across his knees, scanning every rooftop. They passed burned-out blocks still smoking. The mayor's office is gone. The local paper's trailer was reduced to ash. No sirens. No police. Just silence and flame. Jack floored it toward the old radio station on the ridge, KRZR, one of the few FM towers left independent of federal control. It hadn't broadcast anything in years. But Jack knew something no one else did. Eliza Mercer used to work there. She'd left a key under the bricks. The station was a single-story concrete box, covered in graffiti windows busted out long ago, but the tower still stood, a steel skeleton against the gray clouds. Jack ran to the back wall and lifted the fifth brick in the row. There it was, a small iron key. "Let's hope she still believes in second chances," he muttered. Inside the station was dusty but intact. The booth had an old transmitter, dusty knobs, ancient speakers, but it lit up when Jack flipped the switch. Emily connected the drive to the mixer. "We can loop the message. Everything Eliza recorded, everything we found, let it play non-stop." Red set up a perimeter. "We'll have 5 minutes before they triangulate the signal. 10 if they're dumb." Jack grabbed the mic. His hand hovered above the button. "This is suicide," Rosa said. Jack looked at her. "It's a legacy." Then he hit record. Across the airwaves of northern New Mexico, the truth returned. Jack's voice rang out clear. "My name is Jack Callahan, and if you're hearing this, it means they haven't killed us yet." He spoke calmly, directly. "They tried to erase Silverado Ridge. They buried Eliza Mercer. They murdered men for gold, for land, for silence. But we are not silent anymore." Eliza's message followed. Then Lydia's. Then Rosa read from the ledger. Every lie spoken out loud. The first bullet hit the tower leg 5 minutes later. Then came the drones. 2, maybe 3, buzzing like hornets over the ridge. Red stepped into the doorway, rifle aimed high. "We hold them off, as long as we can." Emily was at the board, looping the broadcast, locking in the frequency. "The stream's up. It's online. If they kill the tower, the files keep spreading." Jack stood behind her, revolver-drawn eyes hard. "This is it," he said. "No more shadows." Outside headlights appeared 3 black trucks tearing up the gravel road, no markings, full speed. Rosa turned to Jack. "I can buy you 60 seconds. Maybe more. You'll die." "I've lived in fear long enough," she said. "You gave this town back its voice. I'm not letting them mute it again." She kissed Jack's cheek, grabbed a flare, and ran out the back door, screaming. Gunfire chased her into the trees. Jack clenched his jaw. "Time's up." He turned to Red. The old man nodded. "Let's make this hurt." They opened fire as the trucks skidded to a stop. Emily ducked behind the booth, clutching the drive. Outside, chaos reigned, gunshots, sparks, broken glass. One drone exploded in the sky. Another spun out and crashed into the hillside. But the third made it through. It slammed into the tower, ripping through steel and wire, sending the antenna crashing down with a groan like a dying god. The lights went out. The signal died. Silence. Jack, bleeding from a graze across his ribs, turned to Emily. "You okay?" She nodded. Teeth-clenched hand gripping the drive tight. Red limped back in shotgun smoking. "We've got to move. Reinforcements are coming." These weren't the last. Jack grabbed the satchel with the backup drive and looked out over the ridge. "We need to vanish, but not to hide. To rebuild." Emily met his eyes. Where Jack stepped into the night, lit by fire and falling ash, where they least expect. Hunted and off the grid, Jack and Emily must disappear into the wilderness, seeking help from a forgotten resistance and preparing for the final reckoning. The firelight cast long shadows over the canyon wall, as Jack tightened the bandage around Red's leg. Blood had soaked through 2 layers already, and the old man's face was pale under the flickering glow. Emily crouched nearby, keeping watch eyes locked on the ridgeline. "Are you sure they didn't follow, Jack?" Looked up, they tried. But we covered our tracks better than they expected, and we had help. Red groaned, shifting against the rock. "You mean that Navajo kid with the drone?" "What was his name?" "Ben Yazzie," Jack said. "One of the names in the ledger's margins. His great-grandfather testified against Coleman's family, got run off his land for it." Emily added, "And now he's part of something bigger. There's more of them, Jack. People who've been watching. Waiting." Jack looked into the darkness. "Then it's time we stopped being ghosts. Time we built something real." Red raised an eyebrow. "You mean resistance?" Jack met his eyes. "I mean a network." Over the next 3 days, they moved through arroyos and pine-covered trails guided by Ben and a pair of off-grid scouts from a hidden community nestled deep in the Carson National Forest. The place had no name, just scattered cabins, solar panels, water catchments, and quiet eyes that watched from behind curtains. This was where people disappeared on purpose. Emily stared at a mural painted on one cabin wall, a thunderbird rising from flames. Beneath it were the words, "Truth is a weapon if you aim it right." They were welcomed cautiously, strangers always were. But once the stories were told and the names spoken, the tide shifted. A woman named Marla Two Feathers took the lead. She was part journalist, part survivalist, and all fury. "I've been documenting the disappearances for 10 years, she said. "Every family that's vanished, every whistleblower that slipped. I didn't know who to trust until your voices went out over the radio." Jack looked around the group. Ben Marla, 2 ex-Marines, a teacher from Albuquerque, a burned-out state investigator named Harris, and a dozen others who had nothing left to lose. "This isn't just about Silverado Ridge anymore," Jack told them. "It never was. We're not trying to just expose a secret. We're trying to end a machine." Marla nodded. "Then we hit them where it hurts." They mapped everything. Names, locations, supply lines, known associates, secret accounts tied to shell companies run by descendants of the Wickham and Bradford families. Marla's archive was deep. Jack's documents were precise. Emily's timeline based on the ledgers linked it all together. That's when the real scope came into focus. "This isn't just New Mexico," Emily said one night, tracing lines on a satellite map. "This goes to Nevada, Texas, Colorado, gold, oil, land, all stolen, all laundered into politics, contracts, real estate." Ben pointed at a cluster near Santa Fe. "That facility used to be a bureau archive. Now it's privatized. Wickham Foundation funds it." Marla added, "And guess where Langston's office is headquartered?" Emily narrowed her eyes. "We thought he was damage control. He's something else." Jack leaned forward, voice low. "He's fail-safe. The one they send when fire won't work." That night as they sat around the fire, Red stirred for the first time in hours. His fever had broken. He looked over at Jack. "You still think justice is coming?" Jack poked the coals. "I think justice is a word people use to sleep at night." Red gave a dry chuckle. "You always had that poet's heart." "But listen to me." Jack leaned in. Red's voice was weak but clear. "You don't rebuild the world with forgiveness. You build it with reckoning." Then he fell silent. Emily placed a hand over Jack's. "We're almost there." Jack didn't move. "We're almost past." The next morning, Marla brought them news. An emergency council was forming in Santa Fe, behind closed doors. Langston had called in favors lobbying to shut down investigations claiming the broadcasts were faked. The mainstream narrative was shifting again, spinning Jack and Emily as radicals, maybe even foreign assets. "They're rewriting the story," Marla said. "Same old playbook." Jack stood slowly. "Then we give them a new chapter." Emily looked up. How Jack turned toward the canyon trail. "We take the files, the voices, everything, and we show up in Santa Fe ourselves." Ben's eyes widened. "That's suicide. There'll be kill orders, checkpoints." "Then we go invisible," Jack said. "We use back roads, dead zones, every inch of terrain they thought they owned." Marla smiled for the first time. "You're talking like one of us now." Jack looked out across the forest. "No," he said. "I'm talking like someone who's tired of surviving." They prepped for 3 days. Red insisted on coming despite his limp. "If I'm dying on the right damn road." They loaded the drives, the copies, the hard evidence, and Eliza's final message remastered, cleaned, backed up 100 times. Jack wrote one sentence on the inside of his coat: "If we fall, let the truth keep walking." Emily read it and whispered, "You're not falling. Not now." They moved out before dawn, 5 vehicles, staggered routes, silent radios. The convoy headed south through mountain passes beneath dead satellites, between eyes too slow to track ghosts. At dusk, they reached the edge of Santa Fe. The city was quiet. Too quiet. Marla checked her phone. Feeds are jammed. Social blackout. They're expecting us. Jack gripped the wheel. "Good," he said. "Let them." Jack and Emily crashed the council meeting in Santa Fe with the truth in their hands. But Langston has laid a final trap, one that forces them to choose between justice and survival. The rotunda of the Capitol building in Santa Fe shimmered with polished marble, cold, fluorescent light, and a hush that felt practiced, like the room was built to silence truth before it spoke. Jack's boots echoed on the tile floor as he walked in, flanked by Emily, Marla, and Red, moving slow, deliberate, like they belonged. He wore his worn ranch coat over a clean shirt. Emily held the encrypted hard drive pressed tight to her chest. Red walked with a cane and fire in his eyes. On the raised dais behind a long table draped in a Navy SEAL sat a panel of 5. 3 men, 2 women, government officials. Langston stood behind them, arms folded, face unreadable. "Mr. Callahan," one of the council members said, "you were not invited." Jack didn't break stride. Neither was the truth. He stopped at the foot of the dais. Emily stepped beside him and placed the hard drive on the table. "This contains full documentation of the crimes committed in Silverado Ridge and across the Southwest. Murders, cover-ups, land theft, corruption, linked to members of this council and beyond. You've had it all along. Now the people do too." Langston's voice cut in like a blade. "Mr. Callahan, if you think you can stage a public ambush—" "I'm not staging anything," Jack snapped. "I'm correcting the record." He turned to the small crowd behind them, press staffers and a few live streamers who'd caught wind of something bigger than a meeting. Jack raised his voice. "You tried to bury Eliza Mercer in silence. You tried to erase Lydia Vargas Coleman's victims, the stolen voices carved into that ledger. You tried to kill this story in fire and lies in backroom deals." He paused, then looked at Langston. "But truth doesn't die in the dark, it waits, and when it comes back, it burns clean." A low murmur rippled through the chamber. Langston's fingers twitched once at his side, but he said nothing. Marla stepped forward next. She held up a tablet playing Eliza Mercer's voice on loop, calm, resolute, impossible to ignore. The room fell quiet. Emily followed. "We're not asking for justice," she said, her voice firm but raw. "We're demanding it. Not for us, for the families, for the names carved in stone and forgotten. For every voice you made disappear." The panel looked shaken now. Not all, but enough. One of the women leaned forward. "These are serious allegations." But without proper chain of custody, Jack slammed a leather binder on the table. "Signed testimonies, dated evidence, witness lists. If you won't act on it, we will. The files are already distributed. Every major news outlet, international observers, tribal councils. You don't own the story anymore." Langston stepped forward, finally calm but venomous. "You've forced our hand, Callahan. There will be an investigation. But if this collapses, a state economy, if people die in panic, then maybe it was never built right in the first place," Jack said, his voice low. "You don't fix a house built on bones. You tear it down." Silence. Then applause. Slow, uncertain, but real. It began with one staffer, then another, and soon the room was filled with it. Langston's mask cracked just for a moment. His jaw tightened. His hands curled at his sides. He leaned into Jack, almost whispering, "You have no idea what storm you've called down." Jack smiled, not smugly, but honest. "Good," he said. "Let it rain." 2 weeks later, Silverado Ridge became a symbol, not just of corruption, but of courage. The story exploded. Congressional hearings followed. High-ranking officials resigned. Arrests were made. The Wickham estate was frozen. Coleman, exposed in court, screamed as he was sentenced. But most importantly, people remembered. Murals went up in towns that once looked away. A fund was built in Eliza Mercer's name to support rural whistleblowers. The ledger became a traveling exhibit placed under glass, but still marked by dirt and blood. Jack and Emily didn't go on talk shows. They didn't write books. They went back to the ranch, rebuilt it slowly, quietly. Red passed in the spring beneath a tree he once planted as a child. Jack buried him with a single word carved in the headstone: reckoning. Rosa stayed in town running a cafe and community radio out of the old KRZR shell. She called it Echo Ridge. Ben built drones for local fire departments now. Said it felt like something worth saving. Marla was offered a national anchor position. She turned it down. Too loud. One evening, under a desert sky wide enough to swallow time, Emily sat beside Jack on the back porch. "You think it's over?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "Stories like this don't end. They echo." He paused, then looked at her. "But maybe, just maybe, the truth doesn't need to shout anymore. Maybe it just needs to stand." She smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. They didn't speak for a long time. Out in the pasture, the wind moved through the grass like memory. And for the first time in generations, the land didn't whisper secrets. It rested.